So welcome to our third session of the Inner Explorers Club. Can you hear me okay? Good. So today we're going to be talking about the neural hormone, sometimes also called a neurotransmitter, that is called dopamine. And you've probably heard this word out and about. It's especially being written about a lot in the last few years, as in a lot of scientific communities, it's seen as the driver of evolution. And what's so special about this hormone called dopamine? It's a neurohormone, so it means that you can find it mostly in the brain, but in order to be created, it has to work with lots of other enzymes that are also produced in the stomach, of course, but it's mostly produced in the hypothalamus, which is right in the center of our brain. And the hypothalamus is almost the size of a chickpea. I've drawn it out, but I'm not going to show you until a little moment later. And it's become incredibly famous for a multitude of reasons. That is, of course, you've heard that probably dopamine can be used as a drug. Some top athletes have been using it to better their game. Because what it really does is that it's a reward hormone. So a good example will be when we come into contact with cocaine, the brain is flooded with euphoria, with reward for a short time. And this is what makes us feel so incredibly good, or what makes one feel so incredibly good. And dopamine used to be called the pleasure hormone, but it's not called that anymore because it also has quite a dark side to it. And that is, it's very human to not live, of course, in a constant state of pleasure, of happiness, because there's something that the brain does that always makes sure that our experiences are ultimately balanced out. This is called homeostasis. And so whenever we've achieved a reward, and you might recognize this from something that you've been trying to achieve for a long time, for example, getting a certain type of diploma, and then you get there and there is a moment of euphoria, but then afterwards it becomes quite normal. And homeostasis in the brain basically makes sure that this is balanced out. The thing is, with dopamine, and in our current modern world society, is that dopamine, this reward trigger, is released in our brain every time that we encounter something new that can even be slightly rewarding. So this can be when we're eating something very delicious. For some people, this means gambling. But especially, and this is of course a really big problem, is that dopamine is being released when we are on social media. So what you can kind of imagine happening is that every time we go onto social media, a little bit of dopamine is released. But when the brain notices this dopamine being released, this homeostasis is happening. So it's balancing each other out. That is correcting itself. But what happens over time when we are continuously used to getting all these rushes of dopamine time and time again, multiple times a day, we're constantly getting like slight rewards, is that the balancing out is also having a really big effect on our mood. And this can cause what a lot of us have experienced as this kind of an empty feeling afterwards. And this is why, it's one of the biggest reasons why social media is quite toxic if we are not careful with its usage. So another very interesting thing about dopamine is that it's still a theory, But a lot of big scientists that have been investigating dopamine believe in is that the neurohormone that is dopamine is also one of the biggest drivers of evolution, because there is a large group of people that we today would say they are very prone to developing addiction. But if you would take this same group, and this is the theory, if you would take this same group and you would put them back in the beginning of when man was coming into evolution, when we were living in tribes, this group was actually not very satisfied with how things were. They were craving something more, and that's what it does, right? Like, we want this reward, we want more. Dopamine always wants more, and it wants the unexpected, it wants the new, always more. So these people that would either have too much dopamine or too little dopamine in their brain, they would search for ways to better their life. And so this is seen as a great drive for our human evolution, because they wanted more. They wanted life to be better. So they looked for better solutions. And so we have, of course, many different types of hormones and many different types of receptors in our brain. But something that we're going to be focusing on during our meditation today is the difference between what they call the here and now hormones and, for example, dopamine. Because dopamine is always released when something happens in the future. But the here and now molecules, or the here and now hormones, here and now hormones are hormones like oxytocin, serotonin, endorphin. They are hormones that allow us to sense. So if you, for example, would take a look at your hands right now, look at your hands, you turn them around. Perhaps you can be looking at your legs, looking at your own body, and stretching out your arms, stretching out your fingers. This is what is creating your here and now sensations, also called the peripersonal space, because everything that is happening in this space, no matter how you move throughout this space, is happening in the here and now. And these hormones that I was just talking about, like oxytocin, they're always released in the here and now through the experience of our senses. However, when we want to reach anything outside of this area of the here and now, we need dopamine to motivate us to get somewhere else. Of course, this can be in very low scales, when we want to grab something to eat, or we pick up our phone to check social media. But that's kind of the driver that makes us go outside and into our extra personal space. So we're going to be feeling that, we're going to be experiencing that in our meditation today. But before we go into meditation, I want to end it with one quote from a book by Daniel Lieberman and Michael Lang. And that book is called The Molecule of More: How a Single Chemical in Your Brain Drives Love, Sex, Creativity, and Will Determine the Fate of Human Race. So quite a big title. And the quote is, "From dopamine's point of view, having things is uninteresting. It's only getting things that matter. If you live under a bridge, dopamine makes you want a tent. If you live in a tent, dopamine makes you want a house. If you live in the most expensive mansion in the world, dopamine makes you want a castle on the moon. Dopamine has no standard for good and seeks no finish line. The dopamine circuits in the brain can be stimulated only by the possibility of whatever is shiny and new. Never mind how perfect things are at the moment. The dopamine motto is more, more, more." And I think this is a beautiful segue into mindfulness as well, because mindfulness meditation, it brings us immediately to the now, to the here and now molecules, the here and now hormones, if you will. But the dopamine rush that so many of us are longing for and seeking for and are so used to. It's just so present in our modern life. So I think that's why it's very important to start training the rewards that we get and the pleasure that we can get from the current moment. And that's why we're here, right? We're also here to train ourselves to become more peaceful in this moment. And so I'm going to show you my badly drawn brain. Let's see. So if we were to look at the brain if we turn our heads to the right, this is what the brain kind of would look like. I've drawn the hypothalamus here in the center. This is where most of it is produced, like I mentioned in the beginning. And the pathway that we're going to be focusing on during our meditation today is the pathway that's called the mesocortical pathway. And there's many pathways that the dopamine goes into the brain. But this is the one that we're going to be focusing on because it's going to move into the frontal lobe, which is what we've been meditating on in the past sessions. And yeah, this kind of feels complete. I don't know if you can see it quite well. Very artistic. All right, so let's explore some oxytocin for ourselves, and see what pleasure really means. See what pleasure means for us personally, and how we can perhaps shift it from a very short-lived moment of gratification to something that fulfills us a little bit more in the current moment. So if you've sat for a long time with your legs crossed a certain way, perhaps you want to uncross them, switch them around, balancing it out. Hey, before we journey together into the meditation, I want to take a little moment to remind you that this session is shared from the Inner Explorers Club, the online meditation club in which we meditate together live every week on Wednesday. And when you sign up to join, you'll also receive access to an ever-expanding library of bonus content that helps you create a super powerful meditation practice wherever you go. Of course, all the classes are available without commercials, and by joining, you support the continuation and the growth of my free classes on here as well. Join our community, the live classes, and access the bonus sessions via the link in the description of this episode. And for now, I wish you a beautiful journey inwards. Making any final adjustments that you would need in order to give yourself the most comfortable 10 to 15 minutes of meditation. You may close your eyes. Take a moment to feel your hips touching the pillow or the floor below you. Making contact in your own way with gravity. Breathing in and out, if possible, through the nostrils. And very slowly, from this lowest point of the hips, from your tailbone, start making very gentle circles with the upper body around the center of the tailbone. And these circles can be quite tiny, very small. Or if you feel you want to explore more deeply, you can make these circles a little bit larger. Just explore your balance, even if you have your eyes closed. And if you do make these circles a little bit bigger, I invite you to stay as closely as you can to your breath as you do, perhaps even connecting the in-breath to when you move forwards and exhaling when you make your circles towards the back. Let's do one more round here and then switch directions. Getting into contact with your body. With your perhaps deepening breath. Let's take a few more rounds. And perhaps you want to explore here with making these circles a little bit bigger or a little bit smaller. Just to explore your being this morning or this day, wherever you are. And then slowly allowing the spiral to come into balance and into stillness in the center. Perhaps you're wobbling a little bit as your body levels out and continue to breathe in and out through the nostrils, as from this point we start to connect with one of the hormones of the here and now, one of the molecules of here and now. To the molecule oxytocin. And remember that moment where we connected to the very personal space, which is when we look down at our hands. And if you want, you can open the eyes very slightly just to look down at your hands, becoming aware of what's in your control now as you open them up and close them into fists. Or perhaps if you have your eyes closed, you can just be aware of the experience of movement. And if you've opened your eyes, you may close them again to allow yourself to come into the experience as we start to bring our hands towards opposite arms. And we take an embrace towards ourselves. And you can do this by, like I just mentioned, touch your upper arms, or if you feel you want to increase this hug towards yourself, you can take the arms and wrap them as far as is comfortable without strain around your own body. Giving yourself a moment of just recognition. And as it's pointed out, that oxytocin is usually only released after 20 seconds of being in a hug. We're gonna hold ourselves in an embrace for quite a bit longer than that, just to allow ourselves to feel held. By our own touch, by our own hands. And as you hold yourself in this embrace, can you perhaps already start to notice that there is a part of the body that feels a little bit safer to relax itself now? Perhaps there are multiple parts or muscles somewhere. And as the oxytocin is being released, is your breath perhaps allowed to deepen? And I notice personally, sometimes when I hold myself like this, I really have this almost tight grasp around my shoulders. So let's see if we can bring some softness into this embrace. And in the same way that that we are now connecting to our upper body, let's take a moment to, with our eyes closed, bring these beautiful hands of yours towards the legs. And I know it's a little bit more difficult to hug the legs without getting ourselves in quite a posture. So let's just place our palms on the legs. Perhaps you feel more drawn towards the feet. Or the shins, or the knees. So you can explore on whether you feel like bringing a soft movement, a gentle stroke, for example, to where your hands are placed, covering different parts of the legs and the feet, or perhaps you feel it's okay to let them rest just on the legs and acknowledge your body in this way. And as you have just released this soft, cuddly hormone, can your hands give a similar permission to the legs, a similar type of appreciation or being held to the legs by just taking a moment to connect with them like this, here and now. And however slight, perhaps there are even muscles here that are receiving relaxation as well, as so many of us hold a lot of tension in our legs, in our hips. And journeying up once again with the hands to place them both with the palms facing down onto the space of the heart. And connecting with this space. I'm soon going to be asking you a question, and the invitation is to see if the answer can come from the body into the mind instead of the mind coming up with many quick answers to the question. See if there is perhaps one or two clear answers that are coming from the body, from the heart into the mind, which is often a response that takes a little bit more time. And the question that I would like to ask you is, in the past, perhaps when you were a kid, or perhaps it's recently or something that you see for yourself in the future, what do you feel would truly bring you lasting pleasure? What do you feel would bring you lasting pleasure? Perhaps it's a word or a memory services, or in my case, a piece of music. And if multiple things came up for you, allow yourself to land on that one thing that feels most alive for you, that would bring you most pleasure, most lasting pleasure, not short-term gratification. A nourishing type of pleasure. And if you feel overwhelmed by choices, still allow yourself to land on one, as we take this energy from the heart, from our hand palms, from our fingertips, and we allow this energy, this wisdom to travel with our hands all the way up towards our temples, where we take a moment to bring our fingertips on each side of the face, on the temples, moving them perhaps a little bit further back towards the ears. I'm getting an X-Men vibe here. And as 1, 2, or 3 fingertips connect on either side of the brain, you can allow this energy, even if it's something that you imagine, something you know, something you feel, to connect in the center of your brain, close to or into the hypothalamus, where this dopamine is created. Allowing this notion of nourishing pleasure to meet in the center of the mind, of the brain. And it could be that you feel a slight sensation in the center of the brain, a little activation taking place there. And when you're ready to, you may release the fingertips from the head, and with your eyes closed, take a wonderful and slow stretch in your personal space, in your here and now. And if you want, you can keep your eyes closed for a moment longer as I come to close this meditation. Perhaps you feel to still lay one hand on the heart, or both. And there are some people that say that our evolution won't go very far if we wouldn't have dopamine. And I think that's not really the issue at hand here, or the question that we should ask ourselves, because I think our consciousness is going to be an evolution no matter what. But can we do it from a place of peace? From a place of pleasure that is nourishing to our everyday experience, and instead of continuous external short-term gratifications that in the end leave us feeling perhaps a little bit more empty. And in the end, it's always an inside job. And with those words, I thank you for being an inner explorer today, connecting with yourself in this way, and I look forward to seeing you at our next session. Ciao.
If you enjoyed this eccentric journey, then please take a moment to like or share this episode, whatever feels right for you to do on the platform that you're tuning in from, because it actually helps greatly with the growth and the creation of this meditation channel. Thank you.